Right, now look at this 2015 A-level MCQ paper, question number 26. At present, Sri Lanka's GDP at current market price is approximately. So no point of discussing this question here. The reason, the answer will not be relevant for your A-level year. So we will skip this question 26. Right, now look at this question 27. In question 27, it says, consider the following macroeconomic data for an economy which is operating at an equilibrium national income level. Right. By giving all these data related to consumption, tax revenue, government purchases, imports, exports, and the GDP at market price, the question asks us to calculate the level of investment in this economy. So if the economy is operating at the equilibrium, then we all know that the GDP or the income must be equal to the aggregate expenditure. So we can develop this equation as the aggregate expenditure consists of these components C plus I plus G plus NX. So the value of Y, if not the GDP at market price, is given to us as 8,000. So you make it equal to the total of these four components. So C is 5,000, and then investment is what we need to find. G, government purchases 1,500, and to find the exports, we just apply the equation exports minus imports. So that will be 980, that's exports, minus imports, that will be 1,200. So on this side, we have this 8,000, and the total of all these values 5,000, 1,500, that will be 6,500. And from that, we need to add this 980, and from that we need to deduct this 1,200. So when that happens, the total amount will be 6,280, right? 6,280 plus investment. So the value of investment will be equal to simply 8,000 minus 6,280. So the value of investments will be just 1,720 million, right? 1,720 million. So the answer for this question will be the fourth one. Right, now look at this question 28. In question 28, we see that this consumption function is given to us. And on this side, we get the disposable income. Here we get the consumption expenditure. So the question says, the diagram above displays a linear consumption function. If the autonomous consumption is rupees 4,000, what's the amount of consumption expenditure does point B correspond to? Okay, so the first thing is to recognize this 4,000. So what's that 4,000? Here they say that this is the value of autonomous consumption. So if you remember the consumption equation, it goes as A plus B into YD. And here in this equation, this B represents this marginal propensity to consume. So A represents the autonomous expenditure or the consumption expenditure. So that's this value 4,000. If not, in other words, when the disposable income is 0, 4,000 is the level of consumption. Right. So that's the first thing, that is to recognize this value 4,000. And since they ask us to recognize the consumption expenditure at this point B, right, I believe that if you tabulate the data, it will make the calculations easy. So that let me tabulate the data. So I just take a table with two columns. On one side, I write the disposable income. On the other side, I write the consumption expenditure. So as I explained earlier, when the disposable income is 0, your consumption expenditure is 4,000, and that's the autonomous consumption. And according to the graph, you can understand when the disposable income increases to rupees 10,000, your consumption is 9,000. So let me write that 9,000 here. Right. Now by looking at this table, we can develop the complete consumption equation. So A value is already given to us. So that's 4,000 plus. Now we just need to find this B. So as I mentioned earlier, B is equal to this marginal propensity to consume. And how do we find that? We just find it using this equation delta C divided by delta YD. So the change of YD here is 5,000. That's 5,000. And in the numerator, we take the change of consumption, and that's 5,000. The previous one is 10,000, and this is 5,000. So the value will be simply 0.5, right? So that's the value of B, and I take that value here, 0.5 into, I write YD. So if you have this equation, finding the consumption when the disposable income is rupees 20,000 is just nothing. So you just need to put 20,000 into YD of this equation. So that's just 10,000 plus 4,000 will be 14,000. So that's the answer, right? That's the answer. So you can find that here in the fourth option, right? Now look at this question 29. In question 29, it says, economists assume that as real GDP increases, so by looking at the given options, they just expect us to comment on what will happen to the exports and imports, right? So we need to first recognize that. All right. So if you just look at the exports first, right? In this equation, we write Y equals E, and then we write E equals C plus I plus G plus NX. So inside that NX, what is included? We get both exports and imports. So let me separate that and write here, that is exports minus imports. So this we recognize as net exports. All right. So so let's see what will happen if real GDP increases. Real GDP means Y. If not, in this graph, you take Y here and then E to this axis. So this Y represents the real GDP, if not the national level of equilibrium level of income. So what happens that Y increases, and when Y increases, you just need to recognize what impact it has on exports and imports, right? So as we all have discussed in the classes, we know that exports we recognize as an autonomous expenditure. Exports we recognize as an autonomous expenditure. But in imports, we have both autonomous part and induced part. So let me show you the relevant note on that. Right, look at this one. Here it says under exports, this is this macroeconomic equilibrium lesson or the tube related to that lesson. So here we have this topic exports, and there I'm telling you exports depend on foreign demand rather than the level of income of exporting country. Therefore, it is considered as an autonomous expenditure, which means the amount of exports do not change when the level of income changes. So simply in other words, the exports will be totally independent from the level of income of that given economy. But on the other hand, if you look at the imports, right, look at the note related to imports, it says, right, you have import expenditure here, and it says imports refer to the outflow. Okay, so that is the introduction, and later on it says also imports can be influenced by both domestic income level and other factors. Hence, it consists of both autonomous and induced components, which means simply the exports will change when the level of income changes. I hope that you get that idea. Okay, so let's go back to our question. So in our question, they have mentioned that the level of income, if not the real GDP, right? The level of income, if not the real GDP, increases. And as we discussed, as we checked, right? When the income Y increases, nothing happens to exports. So exports will remain same. But since these imports consist of both autonomous and induced components, when income increases, imports will also increase. එහෙනම් ආන්සර් එක වෙන්න ඕනේ ඔන්න ඔය දෙකෙන් එකක්. එක්කෝ එක කියන්න ඕන exports will remain same. එහෙම නැත්නම් imports will increase. ඔක තමයි වෙන්න ඕනේ ආන්සර් එකේ. එහෙනම් keeping that in mind, so come to this question 29 again. It says exports will increase. Now, as we discussed, exports will remain same. Imports will decrease. No, it will increase with the increase of the real GDP or with the increase of the national income. Imports will increase, not that it decreases. So that is also wrong. The third one, net exports will be constant. No, see what happens. Net exports we calculate using this equation x minus m. So in this equation, nothing happens to x, but m will increase. So what will happen to net exports then? When the real GDP increases, net exports will decrease, not that it remains constant. Right, the fourth one, net exports will increase. No, as we discussed here, net exports will decrease. And the fifth option says here, see, net exports will decrease. 100% true. That's what will happen. So when Y increases, again, nothing happens to X, but M increases. M is a negative value. So finally, what will happen? Net exports will decrease. So the fifth one is the answer for this question 29. Right. The 30th question, which of the following groups would actually benefit from an occurrence of unexpectedly high inflationary price increase? See, during an inflationary period, there are parties who get benefited, and at the same time, there are parties who get affected. Right now, for example, if you look at the retired workers, their income is fixed. Right, their income is fixed. So let me write here, they are fixed income earners, assuming that they receive the pension, right? If not, they will have to depend on their savings. එහෙම වුණත් මම මේ කියන එක හරි. මොකද්ද? එක පැත්තකින් මේගොල්ලන්ට pension එකක් හම්බ වෙනවා නම් they are fixed income earners. අනිත් පැත්තෙන් ඒගොල්ලන්ට pension එකක් හම්බ වෙන්නේ නැත්නම් they will be dependent on their savings. එහෙනම් that will be affected by the high inflation in the country. So මේගොල්ලෝට කිසිම benefit එකක් යන්නේ නැහැ. Lendersලා. දැන් අපි ඔකේ note එකේ ඇත්තටම කියලා තියෙනවා මොකද්ද? Money flows from lenders to borrowers. එතකොට lenders will be the affected party, but on the other side, borrowers will be the party who get the benefit. Enisa, yeah, I see that here. So this will be the answer for this question 30. But we'll look at the other options as well. මෙතන කියනවා wage earners. Again, the wage is something fixed. ඒතර ඒගොල්ලන්වත් අර පළවෙනි කැටගරි එකටම තමයි වැටෙන්නේ. So fixed income earners, and the fixed income earners will be affected by the inflation. ඒතර මේකත් ආන්සර් එක වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Lenders කොහොමත් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඊට පස්සේ elderly people who have saved money during their working years. See, once again, it is somewhat similar to this first option. So they are dependent on their savings. So savings will drastically reduce due to the inflation. So they will be affected, not that they will have the benefit. And an answer for this question 30 is the fifth one. Now look at this question 31. It says, when an economy is at full employment, which of the following will most likely to generate demand pull inflation? All right, so this demand pull inflation we can explain through two different approaches. The first one is this Keynesian approach, And the second one is this quantity theory of quantity theory of money. Right. So if you look at the first one, Keynesian approach, there we say if this aggregate demand, if the aggregate demand increases beyond the level needed to maintain this full employment level of national income, it will create a demand pull inflation. And in the quantity theory of money, it says that if money supply, right, if money supply increases when the velocity and the real output remain same, again it will create a demand pull inflation. So simply, for this demand pull inflation to occur in an economy, either the aggregate demand should increase, if not, the money supply should increase. Right? One of these two should occur. Right. Now we'll go through the given options and let's recognize the most suitable option. Right. The first one says that a decrease in budget deficit. A decrease in budget deficit means government income, right? Government income increases and government expenditure, if not government purchases, G, decreases. See, what does that tell you? We know that this aggregate demand is equal to the aggregate expenditure, and that is calculated by taking the total of these components. So if government expenditure decreases, this value will decrease and it will decrease its aggregate demand as well. Right? එහෙනම් අපිට වෙන්න ඕනි මොකද්ද? aggregate demand increase වෙන්න ඕන, but here due to this first given option, aggregate demand decreases. So that's not the answer. A decrease in net exports. See, once again, this net exports will decrease and it will again decrease the aggregate demand. So the same output. So that's not the answer. Third one, a decrease in trade union power. See, there's no such direct connection between the power of trade union and the demand pull inflation. But if the trade union is very powerful and if they can negotiate high salaries, then it may create a cost push inflation, but not demand pull inflation. So that is not relevant for this given scenario. The fourth option says a decrease in real rate of interest. So what's this real rate of interest? So according to this growth rate rule, you can calculate the real rate of interest using this equation nominal interest minus inflation rate. So the nominal interest means the interest that the banks give when you deposit money, or maybe it could be the interest rate that the banks charge when they offer you loans. You can take it either way, no problem. Right. So if the real rate of inflation decreases, it may due to a decrease in nominal interest rate, or it may due to increase in inflation rate. So either way, right? Either way, if the real rate of interest decreases, people will find it easy to obtain loans. The cost of obtaining a loan, I mean the interest of obtaining the loan will be very minimum, right? So that they will obtain loans from banks and they will invest in new businesses. They will start consuming more and more by obtaining loans from banks. So as a result, what will happen to this aggregate demand? If, as I mentioned earlier, if aggregate demand consists of these components C plus I plus G plus NX, right? When the nominal rate of interest decreases or when the real rate of interest decreases, it will increase the consumption, it will increase the investments. So that ultimately the aggregate demand will increase. එහෙනම් එහෙම එකක් තමයි අපිටත් වෙන්න ඕන. මොකද්ද? Based on the Keynesian approach, the aggregate demand should increase for this demand pull inflation to arise. එහෙනම් this is the answer for the fourth one. Right, the fifth one says a decrease in money supply. No, according to this quantity theory of money, money supply should increase when the velocity and the real output remains same for the demand pull inflation to occur. Right, then the answer for this question 31 is the fourth one. Right, now look at this question 35. In question 35, it says, over a period of 1 year, country's inflation rate was 12%, right? So that's the inflation rate. And over the same period, growth of nominal GDP was 14%. Which of the following correctly describes what happened during 1 year period? Okay, so if I just write the two values that are given to us, the first one is inflation rate, right? Inflation rate is just 12%. And the second one is the growth in nominal GDP. So let me write nominal GDP, and that's 14%. Once again, if you apply this growth rate rule, how do we find this real GDP? Because that's all you can calculate using these two values. So how do we find this real GDP? I mean, increase in real GDP. According to the growth rate rule, to find the increase in real GDP, you just take the increase in nominal GDP. From that, you deduct the inflation rate, nothing increase in price level. So simply you can recognize that to be the inflation rate. So inflation rate. Then the increase in nominal GDP is 14%, and the inflation rate, if not the increase in price level, is just 12%, so that the increase in real GDP is just 2%. Right. So that's all we can calculate using these two values. And now we will go through the given options. The first one says the money supply decreases by 2%. No, we can't comment on the money supply simply by looking at these two values given. And the second one says the money supply increases. Now, once again, the same thing. I mean, we can't comment on the money supply by looking at these two values. The third one, real GNP increased. Yeah. So it is not GDP, it's the gross national product. So there's no difference in the calculation. You just take the increase in nominal GNP, and from that you just deduct the inflation rate. So the answer will be just 2%, and that's a positive value. So what has happened then? The real GNP has increased. So that's the answer. The fourth one says real GNP fell. No, that has increased. And the fifth one says velocity of circulation of money increased. No, we can again comment on that by looking at these two values. So the answer for this question 32 is the third one. Right, 33. Right, look at this question 33 now. It says the concept of near money refers to. Wait, I'll show you the note related to that. And once I show you the note, there's nothing to discuss here in this question. Here you have this topic, types of money used in present society. So the third one is near money. And if you read the definition given for near money, you can understand these are the high liquid financial assets acting as a store of wealth. See, that's the only function they have. I mean, if you are referring to near money, this near money has the ability to act as a store of wealth, and that's it. And then I say they are not used directly for transactions as bank money, which means they do not have, if not, they do not act as a medium of exchange. And that's why we don't use them directly for transactions. Right. So if you have that simple idea in mind, you can find the correct answer for this question 33. Right. The first one says financial assets whose capital values are too unstable for them to be classified as money. So there's no meaning for this given sentence, and I can explain that. The second one, liquid assets. Yeah, they are liquid assets that fulfill the medium of exchange function. No, the near money, right, will not act as a medium of exchange. And we saw that in the tube, but not have the store value function. No, they have this store value function. Right? So somehow the statement given is wrong. The third one, liquid assets, yes, they are liquid and fulfill the store value function, but not the medium of exchange function. 100% true, and that's what we saw in the tutor as well. The fourth one, checks on demand deposits. No, that's bank money. And credit cards, we do not recognize credit cards as near money, and credit card belongs to money substitutes. Right? So that is also then wrong. Then the answer for this question 33 is the third one. Right. Look at this 44. The largest component of M4 monetary aggregate in Sri Lanka at present. So once again, this answer will not be valid for your A-level year. So I'm going to skip this. Right, look at this question 35. It says, suppose that in a commercial banking system, all banks maintain 20% of deposits as a cash reserve, which means SRR is just 20%. Right. One bank receives a new deposit of rupees 200 million, and if there is no subsequent change in the currency in circulation, what will be the maximum amount of loans that the banking system can grant as a result of this new deposit? Okay, so the simplest equation of calculating this maximum amount of loans that can be granted by the entire banking system is initial loan. Right, we write initial loan multiplied by the deposit multiplied by the deposit multiplier. Right. So how do we find this initial loan? See, the question tells us that the banks maintain this 20% statutory reserve ratio. So that it means that the remaining 20% they can offer as loans. So how do we find this initial loan then? You take the initial deposit, which is 200, and from that, this initial bank can offer 80% as the loan. Right. So 200 into 80% will be the initial loan, and that we should multiply by the deposit multiplier. So you should know, by now you should know how to find this deposit multiplier, and that is just 1 over SRR. So SRR is given to us as 20%, which is 0.2. So 200 into 8% will be 160, and 1 over 0.2 will be just 5. So 160 into 5 will be just 800. Right, that is 800. So that the maximum amount of loans that the banking system can grant is 800 million. Answer is the third one for this question 35. Right. 36. Look at this question 36. It says, which one of the following would be expected to occur as a result of an open market sale of government securities by the central bank? Okay, so this is what normally happens. I mean, normally, this is what happens when the central bank sells government securities to the commercial bank. So if I write it here, so we have the central bank. So they sell treasury bills and treasury bonds to the commercial banks, to the commercial banks. And in return, what happens? The commercial banks provide their excess reserves to the central bank. And as a result of purchasing the treasury bills and treasury bonds from the central bank, as I mentioned earlier, the commercial banks put their excess reserves in the central bank, so that what will happen to their ability to create credit? What will happen to this ability? It will decrease. And if the ability to create credit decreases, what will happen to the money supply? In this economy, even the money supply will decrease. So this is what normally happens. Right, now we will go through the given options. Right, the first one says increase in real GDP. See what happens. The outcome is decrease in money supply. And when money supply decreases, it decreases the aggregate demand as well. When aggregate demand decreases, what happens to the real GDP? Real GDP decreases, not that it increases. So this is wrong there. The second one, increase in interest rates charged on loans. All right. Now, to recognize whether this is the correct answer, you just need to have a different perspective. Right. Now, just assume that you are the commercial bank. Right. So you are the commercial bank. Now, this commercial bank, let's say they have excess reserves. Right. Let's say that they have 100 million rupees. Right. Now, from this commercial bank's perspective, if you check it, from the commercial bank's perspective, now they have two options. What are the two options? Either they can buy using their excess reserves, either they can buy treasury bills or maybe treasury bonds from the central bank. And in return, they may receive 5% interest on the treasury bills or treasury bonds. And if you look at the risk of this investment, risk is zero, right? Zero risk. And the second option that this commercial bank has is to offer this 100 million as loans to the general public, right? So we have general public on this side. So the second option will be to offer this 100 million as a loan to the general public so that they can earn again this interest rate, right? The problem is when they offer this 100 million to the general public as a loan, there's a risk, right? So risk is high. Risk is high. I mean, compared to the risk of purchasing treasury bills from the central bank, they have a higher risk of offering this money as a loan to the general public. So if the risk is high, they expect a higher return. And what's their return? The return is their interest, right? The return is their interest. So if the risk is high, even the return is high, which means the interest rate must be higher. I mean, simply, if they receive 5% from the treasury bills or treasury bonds, they will expect at least 6% from the general public for the loans that they obtain from this commercial bank. See, if I put a higher value here, I mean, for example, if I put 15% on treasury bills and treasury bonds, then they will expect at least 16% from the general public for providing loans. See that now. Always the interest they charge on their loans must be higher than the interest that they receive from treasury bills or treasury bonds. The reason, the high risk, right? So that's the discussion related to this second option. So hope you can understand whether this is true or false then. Second one says, as a result of an open market sale of government securities by the central bank, right? Increase in interest rates charged on loans, 100% true. And this will happen, right? The banks will have to increase the interest that they charge on loans. The third one says increase in the number of loans made by banks. No, there's no increase in the, it depends. We don't know actually, but one thing is certain, and that is the commercial banks will increase their interest rates, but we don't know about the number of loans. I mean, when the interest rate increases, generally the number of loans will decrease. The fourth option says increase in private investment spending. See, look at this first discussion we had, right? Look at the first discussion we had, this one. So as per this discussion, I told you when commercial banks obtain treasury bills and treasury bonds from the central bank, their ability to create credit decreases, which means the private sector is not in a position to obtain bank loans easily. So if they can't obtain bank loans easily, they will not be able to make new investments in that economy. There will not be any increase in private investments, but there will be a decrease in private investments in that economy. The fifth one says increase in money supply. No, once again, if you look at this, if you remember this first discussion we had, right? It really decreases the money supply in the economy. So this is also not the answer for this question 36. Then the answer is the second one. Right, now look at this question 37. 37th question says, which of the following does not indicate a market failure? See, existence of monopolies is an example for a market failure. Excessive air and water pollution, I mean simply environmental pollution, is an example for market failure. Lack of such necessities as national defense. Okay, having under allocation of resources for national defense, if not in general, having under allocation for providing public goods is an example for market failure. And the fourth one, the adequate supply of public goods, no, that is not an indication of market failure, right? So the answer for this question 37 is the fourth one. But the fifth one, we'll go through this as well. An unequal distribution of income, no, disparity in income distribution is an example for market failure. So for this question 37, fourth one is the answer. Right, look at this question 38. It says, if an industry ignores external cost it generates in its production, which of the following will be true at the competitive market equilibrium output? All right. So this is somewhat easy. We all know that this social cost is the total of private cost and external cost, right? So let me write here, social cost equals, let me write here, private cost plus external cost. So what will happen if the firm ignores this external cost? Then this is the only thing that will happen. Their private cost, right, will be lower and the social cost will be higher because they have ignored the external cost, right? So if I just draw the diagrams related to this, you will be able to understand this better. So imagine this is the set of diagrams, I mean the demand curve and the supply curve based on marginal private benefit and marginal private cost. And as we discussed, if the firm has ignored the external cost, right, their private cost must be lower than the social cost. So if I draw another graph, another supply curve based on the marginal social cost, that has to be on this side from this initial supply curve. Why? The cost, the social cost is higher than the private cost, right? Then let's see what will happen. This is the market price. On this side we get the quantities and on this side we get the prices. So this is the current price in the market and this is the current quantity in the market. But if they considers, if the firms consider the social cost, then their price has to be higher than the current market price. So this is a price based on social cost. And this is the quantity based on social cost. Right. Now, if you have all these, you will be able to find the correct answer very simply. The first one says price will be greater than the marginal social cost. See, at the competitive market equilibrium, the price, the market price is lower than the marginal social cost. It's lower, not that it's greater. The second one, price will be less than the marginal social. Yes, the market price will be lower than the marginal social cost. So this is the correct answer. The third one says price will be equal to the marginal cost. No, it's not equal. The price is lower. The fourth one, marginal private cost will be equal to the marginal social cost. No, the marginal private cost will be lower than the marginal social cost. The fifth one, marginal private cost will be greater. No, it's the opposite, right? It's opposite. Right. So answer for this question 38 is the second one. Right. Now look at this question 39. A pure public good is a good that is. Yeah. So by looking at the options, you can understand that they are expecting us to comment on the main qualities of public goods. And this is not the first time that we get a similar question. So what are the two main qualities of public goods? On one side, we can say that we have non-rivalry in consumption and also non-excludability in consumption. So those are the two main qualities of pure public goods. And it's easy. Answer is the fifth one. So no need to read the other options. Right. The 40th one, it says fiscal policy involves the government determining. Okay. So this is the policy related to these three things. Right. Fiscal policy is the policy related to government income and government expenditure, and also that is the policy related to public debt. Right, that is the policy related to public debt. Right. So let's read again. Fiscal policy involves the government determining market interest rates. No, the interest rates are decided under the monetary policy, not under the fiscal policy. So this is wrong. The money supply growth rate. So once again, money supply is decided based on the monetary policy, not under the fiscal policy. So that is wrong. The third one, taxation and the government spending levels. Taxation means the government revenue. Government spending means into the government expenditure. Yes, that is the policy, right? I mean, fiscal policy is related to these, and that's the answer. Fourth one, again, money supply, which is related to the monetary policy. The rate of inflation is once again related to this monetary policy. Right? Then the answer for this question 40 is the third one. Right, look at this question 41. At present, okay, see that now, the single largest tax revenue source. So once again, the answer may not be relevant for your A level year. So I'm going to skip that one. Right, 42. The major determinants of comparative advantage among countries include all of the following except one, and you just need to find that one. So climate is based on the location of that country. So the country's geographical location is one reason for having comparative advantage. And so we can consider this to be one reason. The second one, labor force. I mean the amount of resources, right, in general. So that is also again a reason for having comparative advantage. Capital per worker. Once again, the amount of resources, which is a reason for having comparative advantage. Geographical location is also a reason for having comparative advantage, but not this. And hence, that's the answer for this question 42. We'll move to this question 43 now. The question says, the table below shows the number of bicycles and tractors which can be produced with a composite resource unit in country A and country B. And after giving the table, they say, assume that each country specializes in the production in which it has a comparative advantage. For mutually beneficial trade to occur, the rate of exchange between tractors and bicycles should be. Yeah, so by looking at all these given options, you can understand that they have calculated the number of bicycles per tractor, right? So in all the options, that's how we get the answers, right? Per tractor, the number of bicycles per tractor. And the other thing, so we first need to recognize the opportunity costs of producing a tractor in each country. And when we find this opportunity cost, you need to apply this output approach. The reason the question tells us that they have given us the amount that the countries can produce. So that these values are output values, not input values. So when you find this opportunity cost, make sure to apply the equation which you use with output. Right. So let me take this table here and calculate opportunity cost. Opportunity cost. So we have the two countries A, B, and the opportunity cost of producing a tractor. And that's enough. That's why I showed you that in all these options, they have calculated the number of bicycles per tractor. Right. So the opportunity cost of producing a tractor in country A is 60 over 20, and that's 3. And that in country B is 10 over 2, and that is just 5. Why do we use this equation 60 over 20 and 10 over 2? The reason, that's the equation that we use when calculating opportunity cost when output values are given. Right, so this is enough now. So based on this simple calculation, you can recognize the mutually beneficial trade, the ratio. Right, so how do we develop that? So you take this one tractor to the middle, and to the lower value, you just take the opportunity cost of the producing country. See, the country A has the comparative advantage for producing these tractors. So you just take that opportunity cost as the lowest value in this ratio. So 3 bicycles. This is in terms of bicycles. So we write 3 bicycles per tractor. That's from the lowest end, and from the highest end, just take the opportunity cost of the other country. So that is just 5 bicycles, right? 5 bicycles. And for this trade to be mutually beneficial for each country, we should not put this equal sign. All right. So this is the ratio then. For a tractor, at least 3 bicycles, and then at most 5 bicycles. So that's the range. So if you look at this second option, the second option has the answer between 3 and 5 bicycles per tractor, and that's what we calculated. So yeah, so that's the answer. Now 44, it says which is the only combination of price changes that must result in a deterioration of a country's terms of trade. All right, so if you remember the equation of calculating this terms of trade, so what's that equation? Terms of trade is equal to, we write export price index divided by import price index, and we multiply this by 100. So this is the equation of calculating terms of trade. So for a deterioration to happen, for this value to reduce, what should happen in this equation? So simply this is just a fraction. So how do we get a lower value for a fraction? If the value in the numerator decreases, or in other words, if the value in the denominator increases, the final value you receive for that fraction decreases. Right? So that's the theory. Right? Now you just need to find this option from the provided answers. Right, look at this one. The first one says average price of exports. See that now average price of exports is simply the export price index, and the average price of imports is simply the import price index. So what should happen? The export price index should fall. So yeah, so one of these two must be the answers, and then the import price index should rise. And an answer for this question 44 is the first one. Now we will move to this question 45. It says, under a flexible exchange rate system, which of the following should increase the rupee price of US dollar? All right, so increase in the rupee price of a US dollar means depreciation of rupee, if not in other words, appreciation of USD. So let me just show you one example for an increase in rupee price of the US dollar. So just assume that in the initial situation, $1 is equal to rupees 200. But in the second situation, $1 is equal to rupees 250. So this is what we recognize as the increase in the rupee price of USD. right? So this is what we recognize as depreciation. This is what we recognize as depreciation of rupees. If not, by looking at the USD perspective, we can recognize that to be appreciation, right? Appreciation of US dollars. US dollars, right? So simply the question asks us to recognize the reason, the possible reason for this depreciation of rupees or appreciation of USD, right? So under a flexible exchange rate system, this happens. So that let me just show you the curves related to this. Imagine that on this side, we get the quantity of dollars, and on this side, we get the price of, let me write, rupee price of a dollar. Rupee price of a dollar, right? Now we get the demand curve for dollars. This is the demand curve for dollars, and this is the supply curve for dollars. So imagine that the initial price is, we have a certain quantity of dollars here, and the initial price, as I mentioned earlier, is 200. Right? So let me copy this table. Right, now for a depreciation to occur, what changes should happen in these diagrams? Look at this one. What if the supply curve get shifted? I mean the dollar supply curve get shifted to the left side. In simple terms, what if the dollar supply decreases? If the dollar supply decreases, see what happens. The rupee price of a dollar increases. Right? So that is one possible reason. Dollar supply should decrease. That is one possible reason for a depreciation of rupee. The other possible scenario is, imagine what if the dollar demand increases. See, this is the new dollar demand curve, and even if the dollar demand increases, once again the rupee get depreciated. So this is just rupees 250 again, right? So dollar demand should increase. Okay, so that's the first thing that you need to understand. The dollar supply should decrease. If not, the dollar demand should increase. Right, now come back to our question. Right, in question 45, option 1, it says the rate of inflation is greater in USA than in Sri Lanka, which means the domestic inflation in America is very higher compared to that of Sri Lanka. Right, then what will happen? Then these American goods, right? American goods will be expensive for the citizen, so that they will prefer to import Sri Lankan goods to America and to consume them. So what will happen due to this inflation in America? The Americans will prefer Sri Lankan goods. So when they prefer Sri Lankan goods, they will supply more and more USD. Wait, right? They will supply more and more USD, and by supplying these USDs, they will ask for our goods. Then what will happen to the dollar supply? Dollar supply, according to the first given option, will increase. So as a result of increase in dollar supply, the depreciation of rupee will not happen. Instead, it will appreciate the rupee. Right? That is not the answer. Right? Look at the second one now. The second option says the national income increases greater in the United States than in Sri Lanka. See, once again, this question, this second part of this question 45 is related to one of the previous questions that we discussed here. Yes, look at this question 29. Right? Look at this question 29. Now, In question 29, you just learn one thing. And what is that? You learn the fact when the real GDP, if not when the level of national income, Y, when Y increases, you learn that nothing happens to exports, but imports will increase. And if you remember that, you can use that knowledge in our question 45. See, in question 45, it says that national income increases greater in USA than in Sri Lanka, which means when their national income Y increases, what will happen? Similar to the things that we discussed in option 1, again, USA imports will increase. USA imports will increase, right? You can understand that by referring to that question 29. So when income increases, imports increases like in option 1. So once again, what will happen? The dollar supply will increase. If their imports go up, the dollar supply will increase. Then again, the rupee will be appreciated, not depreciated. So again, that is not the answer. The third one, the third option says the increased preference of US citizens for Sri Lankan garments. See that now they prefer Sri Lankan garments. Then once again, what will happen? The imports, USA imports of Sri Lankan goods will increase. එතකොට මේ options තුනට දැන් අපි options තුනක් කතා කළා මේ තුන නිසාම වෙන්නේ එකම දෙයයි මොකක්ද වෙන එකම දේ USA will import more and more Sri Lankan goods. So when that happens, the supply will go up. The supply of dollars will go up and it will appreciate the rupee, not that it decreases or depreciated the rupee. All right. Now look at this fourth one. The fourth one says a substantial reduction of imports coming to Sri Lanka from the United States. See, imports coming to Sri Lanka from USA. Now it's the opposite. I mean, in the fourth option, in the first three options, the USA imported Sri Lankan goods. And in the fourth option, it says a substantial reduction of imports coming to Sri Lanka from USA, which means we are importing goods. We were importing goods, but now we experience a significant decrease of imports of US goods. We don't much import from USA now. So that what will happen? We don't need dollars because if we are not going to import from USA, we don't need much dollars. So the dollar demand decreases, right? Due to this fourth option, the dollar demand decreases. And when dollar demand decreases, once again, අර කියපු depreciation එක වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒතර වෙන්නේ appreciation එක. So ඒව නෙමෙයි අපිට වෙන්න ඕනේ. අපිට වෙන්න ඕනේ එක්ක dollar supply should decrease. If not, the dollar demand should increase. හැබැයි as a result of this fourth option, the dollar demand decreases and it will appreciate the rupee. So that is again not the answer. The fifth one says the real interest rate increases greater in USA than in Sri Lanka. What does that mean? If the real interest rate increases greater in USA than in Sri Lanka, all the investors will be willing to invest their money in USA, not in Sri Lanka. Just think about a bank FD. So the people in Sri Lanka will withdraw their rupees, right? People in Sri Lanka will withdraw their rupees, convert them into USD, and they will deposit those money in USA banks, in American banks. Why? Because now they receive a higher interest for those deposits. And as a result of this, what will happen in that economy? The dollar demand will go up. This happens because all these Sri Lankan investors, they withdraw their rupee deposits from Sri Lankan banks, they convert that money into USD and put those deposits in USA banks so that the dollar demand will increase. And as a result of increasing this dollar demand, what will happen to the rupee price of a dollar? The rupee price of a dollar will increase. And that is the answer for this question 45. The fifth one is the correct answer. Right, we'll look at this question 46. It says, economic growth is usually measured by the annual percentage change in. These are very simple questions. If you just remember the definition of economic growth, you know the answer. So it is evaluated by the annual percentage increase in real GDP, right? Real GDP, not the nominal GDP. So that's a straightforward question. Answer is the second one. Right, now look at this question 47. In question 47, it says, in a hypothetical economy, if the number of people classified as unemployed is 50,000 and the number of people classified as employed is 450,000, then the rate of unemployment in that economy is. Okay, so you just need to find the rate of unemployment. Rate of unemployment equals unemployed people over labor force multiplied by 100. So as per the data given in the question, the unemployed population is just 50,000 and the labor force consists of both unemployed and employed people who are within the working age group and are ready to supply their labor for a certain economic benefit. So based on the data, you can just take the total of 50,000 and 450,000 to be the total value of labor force, and we multiply that by 100. So simply it's 50,000 divided by 500,000 multiplied by 100, and the answer is just 10%, right? So 10% is in the second option. So that's the answer. Right, now look at this question 48. It says, it has been reported that over the last 10 years, the Gini coefficient of income distribution of a particular country has risen from 0.45 to 0.65. See that now, the Gini coefficient has increased. And what does that mean? If the Gini coefficient has increased, it means this. Let me write, Gini coefficient has increased. This means the disparity in income distribution has increased. So that's the meaning, right? Which of the following is a likely cause for this change? Okay, so the first one says market power in factor and market power in output has increased, which means the firms, the business firms have gained the market power in both factors and output, which means the firms have the ability to reduce the price of factors and increase the price of output. So that as a result of this, what will happen? The disparity in the economy will increase, and when that increases, even the Gini coefficient increases, right? So then the answer for this question 48 must be the first one, but we will go through the other options as well. The second one says labor market discrimination has been eliminated, which means there's no discrimination in the labor market. Now everybody has the potential to earn higher income. Then the disparity in the income distribution will be very much lower. Yeah. The third one, the distribution of wealth and property has become more equitable. If so, the disparity in the income distribution decreases. Then the Gini coefficient should also decrease, not that it increases. The fourth one, the vast majority of adults have achieved at least a pass in advanced level, which means their education level has increased. If not, their knowledge has increased. So when knowledge increases, even the low skill workers have the ability to earn somewhat higher income so that the income disparity will decrease. The fifth one, the tax system has become even more progressive. So the tax system, if the tax system is progressive, the government imposes higher taxes for higher income earners, and that will result in decrease in disparity in income distribution. So all these four options decreases the disparity in income distribution, but the first option increases that disparity so that as a result, the Gini coefficient increases. Right. Then the answer for this question 48 is the first one. 49. Which of the following is most likely to reduce inequality in a country's distribution of income? So the two questions are somewhat similar. Yes. Then අපෙන් කලින් ඇව්වේ disparity එක වැඩි කරන්නේ මොකෙන්ද කියලා. දැන් අහන්නේ disparity එක අඩු කරන්නේ මොකෙන්ද? Reduce the inequality, reduce the disparity in countries' distribution of income. All right. So we will go through the options. The first one, an increase in the population growth rate. See, when the population growth rate increases, like in India, the disparity increases. Right? Disparity increases. The second one, vocational training for low-skilled workers. If you see the now, no point of giving this. If you remember this option, both are same. The level of education, the knowledge of the low-skilled workers increases. The knowledge increases so that their earning potential also increases. Then what will happen? The inequality in the income distribution will decrease. It will reduce the inequality in income distribution. Then that is the answer for this question 49. But just go through the other options. The third one says an increase in the budget deficit. Then අපිට අත්‍තරම තේරලා තියෙන මේ budget deficit එක increase කළාම ලංකාවට මොකද වෙලා තියෙන්නේ කියලා. කලින් අවුරුදු වල we had a huge budget deficit. එතකොට මොකද උනේ? Government revenue was very low. Government expenditure was very high. It was very high. And as a result, see what has happened right now in the country. The government has imposed taxes for all the possible goods, for all the possible services, for all the possible people. Okay, අවුල තියෙන්නේ indirect taxes සෑහෙන වැඩි. ඉතින් ඒ නිසා මොකද වෙන්නේ? Tax system becomes regressive. දැන් indirect taxes ගන්න it's more towards regressive tax. එතකොට තියෙන අය අඩුවෙන් ගෙවනවා, නැති අය වැඩියෙන් ගෙවනවා. එතකොට as a result what will happen? The disparity in income distribution will increase. ඒ නිසා making වෙන්නේ මොකද්ද? Disparity increases. ඔක තමයි වෙන්නේ. මේකිනුත් it increases. The fourth one, a decrease in funding for training unemployed workers. ඉතින් එතකොට ආයෙමත් මේකයි sorry. මෙතන කියන්නේ decrease in funding for training unemployed workers. ඒ කියන්නේ unemployed workers. Simply the opposite of the second one. ඉතින් if they decrease the funds allocated for training unemployed workers, ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ earning potentials will decrease, and when their earning potential decreases, the disparity of the income distribution will increase. The fifth one says imposition of a regressive tax. මම දැන් චූටි වෙලාවට කලින් කිව්වා regressive taxes නම් තියෙන්නේ it will increase the disparity in income distribution. So answer for this question 49 is the second one. Right, the last question 50. The tremendous increase in imports and exports, the significant increase in international trade simply has occurred globally over the last few decades. Yes, that's true. Has been caused primarily by the first one, removal of non-tariff barriers in most countries. No, most countries didn't have those non-tariff barriers. I mean, to a certain extent they had, but from the provided answers, right, the one that they have selected is this, the rapidly declining transportation and communication cost. එතකොට අනිත් ඒවත් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. For example, even this could happen, removal of non-tariff barriers. But more than that, for this tremendous increase in the international trade, they accept the fact that the decline in transportation cost and the decline in communication cost is the main reason. So the answer for this question 50 is the third one.